The town of Stillwater sat in the heart of a mist-covered valley, far from any bustling city. Its cobbled streets were eerily quiet, its people pale and distant. At the center of the town loomed an ancient clock tower, its blackened hands frozen in time, or so it seemed during the day. Eleanor arrived on a cold, gray afternoon, drawn by rumors of the strange town. She was a writer, always chasing mysteries for her stories. The innkeeper, a stooped man with watery eyes, gave her a single warning as he handed her a brass key. "Stay indoors at midnight. Lock your door. Don't look at the clock tower." Curiosity burned in Eleanor's chest, but the innkeeper's hollow gaze made her promise. Yet as the evening deepened and the clock struck 12, Eleanor couldn't resist. She slipped on her coat and stepped outside, drawn by an inexplicable pull. The clock tower stood against the starless sky, its shadow stretching across the town square. At first, nothing seemed unusual. But as she turned to go back, the clock's hands began to move. The midnight chime echoed, deep and somber. Eleanor froze. Then it struck again, 13 times. The air around her shifted. The town square, once empty, was suddenly bustling with people. Vendors called out from stalls, children laughed, and music drifted from a nearby tavern. But something was wrong. The faces of the people seemed blurred, their movements mechanical. "Newcomer," a voice rasped. Eleanor turned to see a man in a tattered cloak standing in the shadows. His eyes were sunken, his skin waxy. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. "Now you're trapped like the rest of us." "What's happening?" Eleanor demanded. "The clock tower," the man whispered, glancing nervously at the looming structure. "It's cursed. Every night, when it strikes the 13th hour, time resets. We relive the same night over and over. Those who try to leave, disappear." Eleanor's heart raced. Why? What caused it? The man shook his head. "No one knows. But the tower's magic grows stronger with every cycle. It feeds on our souls." Determined to uncover the truth, Eleanor spent the next cycles observing the townspeople. She noticed patterns. Each person repeated the same actions, like actors in a play. But there were cracks. A child dropped her ball and looked confused. A merchant paused mid-sentence, his expression flickering with panic. The 13th hour, Eleanor realized, wasn't perfect. It could be broken. One night, as the clock struck midnight, she ventured into the tower. The door creaked open to reveal a spiraling staircase. Climbing higher, the air grew colder, heavier. At the top, she found the mechanism, a massive, ornate clock face glowing with unnatural light. At its center was a crystal, pulsing with dark energy. Eleanor reached out, her hand trembling. As her fingers touched the crystal, memories flooded her mind. Images of the clockmaker, a man consumed by grief after losing his family. He had cursed the town, binding it to the 13th hour, hoping to preserve the moment he'd last felt happiness. But his magic had twisted, trapping everyone in a nightmare. The clock began to chime. Eleanor knew she had to act quickly. With all her strength, she smashed the crystal with a brass key from her pocket. The tower shuddered. The light dimmed. The chimes faltered, then stopped. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through her window. She ran outside to find the townspeople stirring, blinking at the morning light as if seeing it for the first time in years. The clock tower stood silent, its hands still. The curse was broken. But as Eleanor turned to leave Stillwater, she felt a strange weight in her pocket. Pulling it out, she found a shard of the crystal, faintly pulsing. Some mysteries, she realized, never truly end. Leo Bennett was a freelance photographer who barely made ends meet. His days were spent chasing gigs, his nights developing photos in a makeshift darkroom in his tiny apartment. So, when an unmarked package appeared on his doorstep one morning, he thought it was just another job. Inside was a camera. It was old but elegant, with polished black leather and brass fittings. There was no note, no return address, just the name, Eidolon Model 13 feet etched into the metal. Curious, Leo loaded it with film and tested it out. He pointed it at his cluttered desk, clicked the shutter, and waited. When he developed the film later that night, he froze. The photo didn't show his cluttered desk. Instead, it showed his desk completely clean, something he hadn't done in weeks. Puzzled, he glanced at the desk and frowned. It was now spotless, just like in the photo. Leo dismissed it as a coincidence, but the camera's eerie power revealed itself again the next day. While walking through the city, he snapped a picture of a busy street corner. When he developed the photo, he saw something that hadn't happened yet: a car crash, with a red sedan colliding into a lamppost. An hour later, as Leo passed the same corner, he watched in horror as the exact crash from the photo unfolded before his eyes. The realization hit him like a freight train. The camera could see the future. At first, Leo was thrilled. He began taking photos of random places, using the images to predict everything from rainstorms to stock market trends. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had an edge, a secret weapon to escape his struggles. But then the prices started to appear. One evening, Leo took a picture of his apartment door, expecting to see the future of his quiet hallway. Instead, the photo showed the door with his nameplate missing. When he went to check, his nameplate was gone, as if it had never been there. Another day, he photographed the corner cafe where he often worked. The photo came out with the cafe's sign missing. When he rushed to the location, he found the sign had vanished, the owner staring at the empty wall in disbelief. Leo began noticing more subtle changes. Objects would disappear: his favorite mug, the books he kept by his bed, even entire pieces of furniture. At first, it was small, almost insignificant. But the disappearances grew worse. One night, he took a picture of himself in the mirror, curious to see his future. The photo developed slowly, revealing an empty frame. No reflection, no Leo. Panic set in. Over the next few days, he tried to stop using the camera, but it was as if it had a will of its own. Its presence was oppressive, its lens constantly seeming to point at him no matter where he placed it. The more he avoided it, the more the world around him unraveled. His friends stopped answering his calls, their numbers vanishing from his phone. His family's photos disappeared from his walls. People he passed on the street seemed not to see him, as if he were fading from existence. Desperate to undo what he'd done, Leo decided to destroy the camera. He smashed it with a hammer, but it remained intact. He threw it into the river, but it appeared back on his desk the next morning, pristine and waiting. Realizing he had no other option, Leo took one final photo. He aimed the camera at his own reflection again, this time determined to see it through. When he developed the film, his hands trembled. The photo showed his empty apartment, the camera sitting alone on the desk. A chill ran down Leo's spine as his surroundings began to blur and dim. He tried to scream, but no sound came. His body felt weightless, as though he were being erased. The last thing he saw was the camera's lens glinting in the dim light, as if mocking him. And then, Leo Bennett was gone. The camera, the Eidolon Model 13, remained where it was, waiting for its next victim. The cycle would begin again, as it always did, with someone else curious enough to test its power, and reckless enough to pay the price. Holly Grant loved the stillness of midnight. As the host of the small-town radio show Night Owl Hour, she thrived in the quiet hours when the world seemed to pause, leaving her alone with her listeners and their stories. Her show was simple. She played requests, read heartfelt dedications, and occasionally took live calls. For 5 years, the routine had been her comfort. But one cold October night, everything changed. The call came in at 12:15 a.m., just as Holly was transitioning between two songs. The blinking light on the switchboard caught her attention. Normally, she welcomed calls, lonely insomniacs, truckers on long hauls, or teenagers testing their courage to speak live on air. But as soon as she answered, the voice on the other end made her freeze. "Hello, Holly," the caller said. His voice was low, calm, and chillingly familiar, though she couldn't place it. "Hi there. You're live on Night Owl Hour. What's your name?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. The caller chuckled softly. "Names don't matter, do they? What matters is the truth." Holly's fingers hovered over the "end call" button, but curiosity kept her from pressing it. "What truth are you talking about?" There was a pause, and then the voice said, "The Peterson house. Tomorrow night. The fire starts in the kitchen." Her stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "I think you know." The caller replied, "You've always known." The line went dead. Holly sat in stunned silence, staring at the phone. The Peterson house was just a few blocks from the station. Everyone in town knew the Petersons, a sweet elderly couple who had lived there for decades. Holly shook it off, convincing herself it was a prank. She returned to the show, playing a set of classic rock songs to distract herself. But the next night, at 8:30 p.m., the Peterson house burned to the ground. The fire chief said it started in the kitchen, just as the caller had predicted. The Petersons escaped unharmed, but Holly couldn't shake the feeling of guilt gnawing at her. She hadn't believed the caller. She hadn't warned anyone. 3 nights later, the mysterious voice called again. "Did you see the fire, Holly?" he asked. "What do you want from me?" She snapped, her voice trembling. "Another warning," he said, ignoring her question. The bus depot. Midnight. A man with a knife. This time, Holly didn't hesitate. She called the police as soon as the show ended and told them about the tip. They were skeptical but sent an officer to investigate. At 12:03 a.m., a man was arrested at the depot, carrying a knife and stalking a lone woman waiting for her ride. Holly's relief was short-lived. The caller had been right again, and now she couldn't dismiss him as a prankster. The calls kept coming, each more chilling than the last. He predicted break-ins, assaults, and even a string of disappearances in the neighboring town. Each time, Holly tried to warn the authorities, but they began to doubt her, accusing her of fabricating the tips for attention. Holly became obsessed with the caller's identity. She combed through old recordings, listening for clues, but the voice was maddeningly nondescript. The caller knew intimate details about her life, her childhood fears, her favorite songs, and the secret she had buried deep. An accident she had caused as a teenager that had taken another life. "You're not a stranger," she whispered during one call. "Who are you?" "I'm your conscience," he replied. One night, the caller made his most terrifying prediction yet. The radio station. Midnight. Someone will vanish without a trace. Holly's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "You know what I'm saying," the caller replied. "Someone disappears tonight, Holly. And it's because of you." Panic set in. Holly locked the station's doors and called the police, but they dismissed her as paranoid. Midnight came and went, and nothing happened. She began to think it was finally over, until she heard footsteps behind her. Spinning around, she found herself face to face with a man she recognized from an old photo, a man who should have been dead. The next morning, the police found the studio empty, save for a microphone still recording. The last broadcast? A song Holly had played countless times, Sound of Silence. No one ever discovered the caller's identity. But some nights, when the town's radios pick up static, Holly's voice can still be heard whispering, "Is anyone listening?" On a remote island, surrounded by endless waves and treacherous reefs, there stood an ancient lighthouse. The island's people were simple, living their lives in harmony with the ocean. But every year, when the winds began to shift and the tide came in with a strange force, the islanders gathered around an ancient hourglass that had washed ashore long ago. It was said that this hourglass controlled the very tides themselves, and that turning it could save the island from the annual flood that threatened to destroy their homes. The hourglass was beautiful, its glass made from a rare sea crystal, and the sand inside shimmered with a faint blue light, as though it had been touched by the ocean's own magic. No one knew where it came from or who had made it, but every year, as the hour approached, the villagers would gather, and the elder, the keeper of time, would turn the hourglass. The floodwaters would recede, the storm would calm, and peace would return to the island. But this year was different. A young scholar named Lena had arrived on the island, seeking knowledge of ancient magic and forgotten relics. She had heard stories of the hourglass and its power, and she was eager to learn more. The villagers welcomed her, but they warned her not to meddle with the hourglass. It was a sacred tradition, they said, and had been passed down through generations. Lena was intrigued. She had studied many ancient texts and artifacts, but the hourglass was unlike anything she had ever encountered. The villagers explained that the hourglass didn't just control the tide, it controlled time itself. The sand inside was not ordinary sand. It was collected from the very shores of the island, where the ocean met the land, where the past and future intertwined. As the day of the turning approached, Lena couldn't contain her curiosity. She approached the keeper of time and asked if she could learn more about the hourglass. The keeper, an old woman with eyes as deep as the ocean, studied her for a long moment before nodding. "You seek knowledge," she said softly. "But remember, not all knowledge is meant to be used." Lena didn't understand, but she nodded respectfully. The islanders began to prepare for the ritual. The tide was rising, the winds were growing stronger, and the sky was turning dark. The hourglass was placed carefully on a stone pedestal in the center of the village, and the villagers gathered around in silent reverence. The keeper stood before the hourglass and placed her hands upon it, closing her eyes in concentration. Lena watched closely, fascinated by the power that seemed to emanate from the hourglass. The keeper then spoke the ancient words that had been passed down through generations, words that no one had spoken in centuries. The sand inside the hourglass began to flow, slowly at first, then faster and faster, until the storm outside began to quiet. The villagers cheered as the winds calmed and the waves retreated. The flood had been averted once again, but Lena couldn't help but notice something strange. The sand inside the hourglass, which had once been full, was now almost gone. A feeling of dread washed over her as she realized something was wrong. The keeper had only turned the hourglass once a year, but the sand was running out much faster than it should have. That night, Lena stayed awake, watching the hourglass. She couldn't shake the feeling that the island was in danger. If the sand ran out completely, what would happen to the tides? What would happen to time itself? The next morning, Lena approached the keeper, her heart heavy with worry. "What happens when the sand runs out?" she asked. The keeper's face was grave. "The hourglass was never meant to be turned endlessly," she said softly. "It is a balance. The sand must flow, but only in time. If it runs out, the ocean will reclaim the island, and time will stop. The ritual was never meant to be a cure. It is a reminder." Lena's eyes widened. The island had been protected for generations, but now the hourglass was running out. She had to find a way to restore the balance, or the island, and its people, would be lost to the ocean forever. Lena spent days searching the island, studying the ocean's patterns and consulting the ancient texts she had brought with her. In her research, she discovered a hidden truth. The hourglass had been created long ago by a powerful mage who had sought to control the tides and the flow of time. But in doing so, the mage had created an imbalance, one that could only be corrected when the hourglass was used wisely. With this newfound knowledge, Lena returned to the hourglass, determined to set things right. The keeper stood by her side, and together, they recited an incantation that would restore the hourglass to its original state, allowing the tides to flow naturally once more. As the spell took effect, the sand inside the hourglass began to slow. The ocean, too, seemed to settle, its restless waves returning to their natural rhythm. The storm clouds above the island parted, revealing a sky full of stars. The villagers gathered around, watching in awe as the balance was restored. Lena had saved the island, but she knew that the ocean was not to be controlled. It was a force of nature, wild and untamable, and it had to be respected. From that day forward, Lena became the keeper's apprentice, learning the true nature of the hourglass and the power of the ocean. She knew that sometimes, the greatest magic was not in controlling time, but in understanding when to let go. The Rawalpindi railway station, nestled in the heart of Pakistan, was once a bustling hub of life. Built during the British colonial era, its arched windows and towering clock had stood the test of time. Over the years, however, whispers of the station being haunted began to take root. Locals told tales of a railway worker who had died in a tragic accident long ago, and whose spirit now lingered, trapped between the platforms of the living and the beyond. It was on a chilly winter night that Shahbaz, a young journalist from Lahore, arrived at the station. Shahbaz was a skeptic. He had heard the rumors of the haunting while visiting his family, and his editor, eager for a sensational story, had encouraged him to investigate. Determined to debunk the legend, Shahbaz decided to spend the entire night at the station, armed with nothing but his notebook, a camera, and a thermos of chai. The station at night was a different world. The usual clamor of arriving trains and hurried passengers gave way to an eerie stillness. Shahbaz set up his station on an empty bench near platform 2, where the supposed haunting was said to occur. The air was thick with an unsettling quiet, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. At precisely midnight, Shahbaz began to hear faint sounds, rhythmic footsteps echoing down the empty platform. He strained his ears, assuming it was a late-night guard. But as he turned his head, the platform remained empty. The sound grew louder, closer, as though someone was pacing just beyond his sight. Shabazz gripped his notebook tightly, his heart pounding, but he convinced himself it was the acoustics of the station playing tricks on him. Then came the whistling. A soft, mournful tune floated through the cold air, sending a shiver down Shabazz's spine. It was not the sort of sound one expected to hear in a deserted station. The melody was hauntingly familiar, like an old folk song his grandmother used to hum. It seemed to emanate from the tracks themselves. Unable to resist his curiosity, Shabazz rose from his bench and followed the sound. The platform stretched before him, its flickering lamps casting long, wavering shadows. He paused near an old signal box, his breath visible in the icy air. That's when he saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows near the edge of the platform. It was a man, dressed in an old railway uniform, his back turned to Shabazz. The man appeared to be inspecting the tracks, his lantern glowing faintly. For a moment, Shabazz felt relieved, assuming it was a railway worker he could speak to. "Excuse me." Shabazz called out. The figure froze but did not turn. Instead, the air grew colder, and the whistling stopped abruptly. Shabazz hesitated but took a step closer. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice wavering. The figure slowly turned to face him, and Shabazz's blood ran cold. The man's face was pale, almost translucent, with hollow, sunken eyes that seemed to pierce through him. His mouth moved, but no words came out, only a faint whisper carried by the wind. "Why didn't they stop the train?" Shabazz stumbled back, his legs weak. The ghostly figure began to walk toward him, each step slow and deliberate. Shabazz turned and ran, his heart racing as he darted back to his bench. But no matter how far he ran, the whispers seemed to follow him. Why didn't they stop the train? Desperate to escape, Shabazz dashed into the station master's office, slamming the door behind him. The elderly station master, startled by the intrusion, looked up from his tea. "What's gotten into you, lad?" he asked. Shabazz struggled to catch his breath. There's a man out there. On the platform. He's not human." The station master's face darkened. He set his cup down and sighed heavily. "So, you've seen him," he said. "The railway worker." Shabazz nodded, his hands trembling. The station master gestured for him to sit and began to recount the tale. "His name was Ahmed," the old man began. "Decades ago, he worked here, a diligent and kind man. One fateful night, a train failed to stop at the station, speeding through when Ahmed was on the tracks inspecting a signal fault. He never saw it coming. They say his spirit has been wandering ever since, seeking answers, wondering why the train didn't stop." Shabazz listened intently, the weight of the story sinking in. "But why does he haunt the station?" "Because this was his life," the station master replied. "This station was his home. He feels betrayed, and his soul cannot rest." Shabazz glanced out the window, half expecting to see the figure again. "Has anyone tried to help him?" The station master shook his head. "How do you help a spirit burdened by tragedy? Perhaps he's doomed to walk these platforms forever." Shabazz left the station at dawn, shaken but determined. He penned his story with care, detailing the legend of Ahmed and the ghostly presence that lingered at Rawalpindi railway station. The article captivated readers, but Shabazz knew the real story would never truly be understood. Weeks later, Shabazz received a letter in the mail. It contained no sender's name, only a single sentence written in trembling handwriting. "Thank you for remembering me." Shabazz stared at the letter, a chill running down his spine. He folded it carefully and placed it in his notebook, knowing that Ahmed's story, and his haunting, would remain with him forever.